first, if the panel can introduce themselves, name, title, and maybe one or two campaigns that you worked on last cycle. So Greg, we'll start with you.
Yep. My name is Greg Butcher. I run a new company called Alamo Intelligence. And then I spent the last 2 cycles at Congressional Leadership Fund, involved in essentially nearly every competitive House race in the country.
Yeah, hi, I'm Laura Carlson. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the Democratic Governors Association. I've been leading the digital shop there since 2019, and a part of just a really historic few cycles, expanding the map for DemGovs. And prior to that, I was Senator Jackie Rosen's digital director on her first campaign.
I'm Cliff Naylor. I'm at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. I've been there since the 2018 cycle, and this last cycle I was the Chief Digital Fundraising Officer. Prior to that, I was at a digital firm, Rising Tide Interactive, and on Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign.
My name's Jason, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at Revv and WinRed. Before that, I was at Targeted Victory, a fundraising firm for about 10 years. Worked on the Romney campaign, governor's race in Oregon, Chris Dudley, and before that, Rudy's very short primary campaign in 2008.
Great, thank you, everyone. So we wanted to talk about like the tension between voters and SMS email tactics. This I know was coordinated by some campaigns well and others not so well. And if each of you can go into how you coordinated this by suppressing this or et cetera. Cliff, we can start with you.
Yeah, so I think that the question is about volume, right? The amount of solicitations that folks receive. This has been a trend that has been kind of increasing in the space for a number of cycles now. And we have seen email service providers make some changes to kind of help users and users of inboxes have a good inbox experience. So the most obvious one is like Gmail and their promotions tab, primary tab, et cetera, that a lot of people utilize. But, the volume in political campaigns is not going away. Campaigners send the amount of volume that they do because it works. Everything that digital marketers do in the political realm, as I'm sure in other realms as well, we test everything, right? And so the stuff that you end up seeing that makes it to your phone or your email inbox, that is usually the result of multiple versions that have been tested, and is the one that has been proven to be most successful. So oftentimes one of the interesting things about a list, both in terms of the volume and the content, is that really what you're seeing is kind of a reflection of what that list's supporters have responded to, what they want to see. Sometimes it creates kind of an interesting tension, right? Because like people get them and they're like, who would want to see this? Or like, who wants to receive this message? And the thing is, like, people do want to receive those messages because they're responding to them. We're sending the stuff that people respond to. So I think that, moving forward, at least on our side, the thing that we will continue doing is being very data-driven and testing and making sure that every decision, whether or not it's volume or content or what, is being based off of what the data shows us is the likeliest path to the most revenue.
Great, thanks. Laura, not sure if you want to piggyback on any of that on the Democrat side?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Cliff. I think that something that I would add on that is, in addition to the data-driven decision-making chain that I think you'll see from the largest organizations, certainly on the Democratic side. I think that to add on the volume calculation there, in addition to testing those messages and sending what donors and voters are most responsive to, you also see the biggest and best quality programs are also really monitoring statistics such as deliverability and open rates, and keeping our volume in check with that. I think on the SMS side of that, we also really carefully monitor our audiences and deliverability on our different SMS platforms. And I think some of the problems that we'll get into today or that folks are familiar with occur when you have a bad actor maybe, or a less diligent program who's not monitoring your deliverability and not monitoring that you're sending to the correct audiences and the correct cadence on the email or SMS side. So I'd add that there as well.
Hey, Greg, for the Republican side, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I think like volume is definitely a challenge, and it's something you hear a lot about from voters, from candidates when they hear it from their voters. But I think the thing to consider is like the mindset that they're not just donors, but they are voters, right? Like if you're talking to people and asking them for money, ultimately, yes, like they are a donor to your campaign potentially, but they're still going to the ballot box. And so I think in 2022 and maybe in 2020, you saw a ton of content that was so offensive to people as voters, right? Like the shaming, right? You're not Republican enough if you don't donate. You've lost your patriot status, whatever this kind of stuff was. So much of that, it makes the conversation around volume more, I guess, more sharp because people are getting so much, and they're also getting the stuff that's like counterintuitive to what they should be hearing from the people that want their money and want their vote. And I'll give a ton of credit to President Trump's campaign this cycle. If you look at the stuff they were sending, his text messages would be like, "I love you," right? Like, "Thank you." Like, if you don't have the money to give, don't. Right. And so there were, at least in the sphere that I'm around, there were a lot less complaints around volume, especially from the presidential side, because the content itself was so much less offensive and was much more in tune with treating donors like voters, which ultimately they are. Right. And so I think some of it's content. And then the second piece is like value prop, right? Like in corporate marketing, you would have a conversation that starts at like the top of the funnel and the demand you're creating for ultimately like the product you're trying to sell. And in politics, we skip every step and we go right to the bottom, right? You've signed up for my list, give me your money. And we offer nothing in return. And so you can send volume, but if it's the off year and you're trying to raise money, you got to be giving something in return, whether that's information, whether that's you're selling merch, something that gives people a reason to donate when politics is not at the top of their mind. And so I think those two things, if you adopt that, the volume conversation becomes a little less important.
Yeah, great insights. So another thing that I wanted to ask with the messaging tactics last cycle, with like external, that was more an internal event when Biden dropped out, but with any event like that it's like a major shift, how do you pivot? Like how fast can your teams pivot? Like how did you work that last cycle? We'll start with you, Laura.
Yeah, I think this was a really unique moment to be at the DGA. As you saw, once Kamala got into the race and the VP conversation began, I think that was a critical moment for us at DGA, as many of the finalists were Democratic governors. And once Governor Tim Walz was announced, and there was this moment of huge Democratic enthusiasm and donor enthusiasm, Walz mania, as folks might recall, we were in a really unique position because he was our former chair of the DGA. And so we had a lot of content banked, and we were one of the only ones who had direct-to-camera video footage with him. We knew his voice. We had great relationships, of course, with his staff and his team. And we were able really to capitalize on that and let voters hear directly from the governor and our former chair and the vice presidential nominee. So I think that was critical to us in terms of a fundraising advantage, the topic of this panel as well, because we were so well positioned and uniquely positioned within the party to amplify that aspect of the transition as well. And as you'll see here in a minute, we really had amazing fundraising returns on that front as well.
Great, Cliff. Do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, so rapid response moments are always a challenge because on the one hand, you want to be as quick as possible getting out the door with your content. You also obviously want to send the content that is most successful. One of the things that we have been really lucky with in my department at the DS is we have a incredible, large and talented team who is just constantly ready to, like, when you see, we have like a Slack room that we just post, breaking news updates in. And that's kind of where you see, like, if something rises to the level of something we'd want to push aside our planned content and move toward. So I think that a lot of responding effectively to moments like that, and that obviously was a kind of a big moment for, I imagine, both sides. That was a very galvanizing moment for fundraising, and having a team in place who's able to execute rapidly and at a high level. I think is one of the most important things to be able to respond effectively to those sorts of moments.
Greg, do you want to talk about how you guys were able to pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is like you got to be watching what voters are watching. And back in 2018, when I was at an agency, our rule was sort of like we should be sending what Fox News is talking about. And I think now it's maybe like we should be sending what Fox News is talking about and what's trending on X, because there's like obviously much more fragmentation. And I'm probably like giving away some of the stuff that we'll talk about later, but like I still remember one of our most successful moments of the whole cycle, because the House doesn't get nearly the same. You know, we're like third in line when you start talking about a presidential cycle. Everybody cares about the presidency, the Senate, and then the House. And so we didn't have like really big moments like that, other than maybe the transition for the speaker, which we leveraged with Speaker Johnson. Mm-hmm. But the campus protests, when things were going on the campuses related to the October 7th attacks, you saw so much outrage about the anti-Semitism and all of those things. And then you saw House Republicans making real news, standing up for Israel. And we sold a ton of merch that was like, if you support what House Republicans are doing on this, buy this Stand With Israel mug, right? That mug was our top seller of the cycle. And it was something we launched in 2023, not a 2024, campaign or moment. And so you never really know what's going to like pop off or resonate, but you have to be willing to try when the iron is hot, because even one day the moment could be gone. And so you got to be able to get it out the door. If it's happening at 9 or 10 a.m., you got to be sending something by noon, so that if it works. You're gonna be able to send it that evening when your real opportunity is in sort of like the fundraising life cycle of a day.
That's great. So we have a little bit of a show and tell. Let me get the clicker. Right. Hopefully it works. All right. So this one's for Jason.
So this is the most important thing that you'll see at this conference. WinRed does not send text messages. It's not us. It's Greg. It's other people. We are a landing page solution. So if you give money to Republicans, hopefully it's through us, or if you sign a petition or get some merchandise, but we don't send the texts.
All right. So let's see. All right, I think that worked. Okay, Greg, this is yours. You just spoke about it. But.
Yeah, I mean, this is so simple, and you would never think, but this is literally our top fundraising text of the election cycle. And it was about giving $25 to help expand the majority because House Republicans are standing with Israel. And we sold it until election day. Like it started in 2023 and it went on and it went on. And every time you had a new campus protest, a new reason to talk about it, another bill that was being filed, some member of the House on the other side that said something offensive or ridiculous, we would re-up it again, right? And every time, maybe it wasn't the same pop, but it was our most consistent performer all cycle. And it, I think, just underscores the importance of testing, because it wasn't something that a ton of people were sending on. And you have to be able to try different things and be okay with the idea that it's going to fail. Because for every I Stand With Israel mug that was incredibly successful and not super complicated, I have a collection of mugs that's probably 50 that did not sell because we had to buy them. So I'm set on coffee mugs for the rest of the year. But like, it's just the importance of failure, I think, is necessary in this.
Great. So this one is Doris.
Yeah, we have a bunch of content streams that are really reliable evergreen content for us that I could have put up here, such as protecting Social Security and Medicare from GOP attacks, USPS, and folks' opposition to Louis DeJoy. But a few examples that I wanted to bring today. The first one was surrounding Vice President Harris's launch. We had a really strong split fundraising text go out and a rapid response moment that was a split fundraiser with the DGA and and her campaign, a really common, of course, split fundraising tactic. But actually, an even stronger performer for us was the secondary bump. And so I think that's a tactic that's really interesting for folks to think about. We reached out, we're like, did you see the vice president's message? And we want to hear from you directly on that. And one of our best tactics on SMS is actually a survey flow rather than a direct fundraiser. So you can see an example of that here. And one of the ways that we've been able to so successfully increase our fundraising exponentially for governor's races specifically is we lead with this wide funnel of something that everyone is tuned into, whether that's online, MSNBC, in the news cycle. We take that and actually lead them through a flow that's like, great, did you know Democratic governors are actually taking action on so many of these issues that are important to you in the states, and that we have elections up this year in key states like North Carolina. And after that series of 5 or 6 questions that leads from this text, we don't actually ask them for money until after that. So I think it's really counterintuitive to what folks might think is a best practice to get someone on the landing page immediately. We actually were able to raise even more money with a survey flow that starts like this. And then this is another top performer I wanted to throw up here. I already kind of went through some of why I think we were able to be uniquely successful in this moment around his announcement as the vice presidential nominee, because our list already knew Governor Walz and they already trusted him and they knew the importance of his work as a Democratic governor and all of his policy success in Minnesota. And so I think that's what made this a unique moment specifically for the DGA and our supporters, because they were already on Team Walz, and so we're able to see him elevated to the national stage, and that was a really excellent combination for us.
I think it's very interesting that you both shared text with images, without images. This one's very long. The last one was very short.
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting that there is no consistent, like, it depends. I think you said, Laura, it depends on the campaign.
Yeah, definitely another plug for the importance of testing, but also for variety as well.
Yeah. And Cliff, I think you wanted to say something about this.
Yeah, so I don't have specific examples to put up, but one of the things that I always try to do when I am trying to analyze what concepts are working for other programs is to look at what they keep sending over and over again. And it's kind of like chances are if they're sending it multiple times, it's hopefully it's working for them, unless they're, well, and the more frequently you see it, the better it's likely performing. And I think that that's a really good trick that folks can use, really no matter what organization you're with, when you're looking for new concepts or content to get onto your own calendar. Don't just look at the space and see what other people are sending that like appeals to you as a person and that you would necessarily personally donate to. Take a look at what others are sending repeatedly and use that as kind of like a window into what you can intuit their performances, and use that to kind of help inform your future campaigns.
I will give a tip to everyone. I think I heard a marketer try to start a text program, and they did the same thing. I think she subscribed to every single service she can think of, and then she went crazy, and she's like, do it on a separate phone. Do not do it on your personal phone. Like, do it on a work phone so you don't get pinged every 2 seconds. All right, so let's get into some personalization tactics. Jason, if you want to talk briefly about WinRed's tactics.
Yeah, so WinRed is a donation platform. So after you get the solicitation, you go to fill out a form or a donation form or buy some merchandise. That's us. And we have rolled out a ton of personalization features because everybody is different. And especially when it comes to donating, they have different price points that they can afford, or they want to give, or different people they want to give to. And so whether when you land on the page, if you're logged in, if the four of us, well, two of us went to a landing page on WinRed, probably Greg and I would see different amounts because Greg might be a $100 donor and I might be a $10 donor. So showing the same amounts doesn't make a lot of sense. And then depending on the action that one of us took on the landing page, we have something called an upsell, and ActBlue has the same thing. So after you give, you're asked for another task, whether it's to give again or sign up for recurring or something like that. Those are personalized based off the action you took on the landing page. Because again, we're all different. And if someone's a max out donor, you probably don't want to ask them to sign up for recurring. So you could just say thank you. I really kind of like got hit home back in 2012 and I worked on the Romney campaign. And I think it was the day Obamacare was upheld by the Supreme Court. And I realized the Obama people upped their donation amounts that day from whatever they were. And it was like, oh, that's really cool. And so like we started doing that on Romney. If we had the big day, we would change it. And so not every person sees everything the same every day.
Yeah, nice to hear. And Laura, you on the Democrat side, you want to talk about the personalization?
Yeah, definitely. We've definitely been pioneering, personalized donation amounts on ActBlue for many cycles like that. And we at the DGA specifically, not only do you get a unique amount on ActBlue, unique contribution options, we also, of course, carry that through to our email program for any existing donor. We do a lot of testing there, as well as testing for our prospects or non-donors about the moment and the ask that makes them most likely to give. The other thing I would bring in here is some of those survey flows that I spoke on earlier. Through being able to gather folks' responses, gather their data through that survey flow, that gives us a lot of insight to what donors really do want to hear about. A lot of times they want to give you that input, and that's like their number one ask. They're really excited to engage with us in that way. And so by being making that such a large part of our fundraising flows, both on the email and SMS side, I think that has allowed our program to reach new heights by having that open channel of communication, sending out so many surveys and focus groups. In addition to only asking directly for money, we've been able to make that a big pillar of our program as well. And I think speaks directly to listening to individual donors and voters.
Actually, one of the big support requests we get from donors over the years had been, hey, I filled out this survey. What were the results? They want us to tell them what were the results. So one of the features we rolled out last cycle was you can actually put the results of your survey on the next page. And it cut down on customer support reaching out to us by a lot, because donors, like, they actually care. They want to know, hey, I voted for, again, Nikki Haley or Donald Trump or whoever for president, or this is my top issue. What's the top issue for everybody else? They really believe this. And so like treating them well and showing them the results has worked out, pretty well across the platform.
That's very cool to hear. Yeah, I would probably want to know. I love survey results, so I would probably be one of those people to bug whoever. All right, so let's look at the future. So predictions for next cycle, or maybe what you're looking forward to. Maybe I don't know if you guys are going to use AI in the future, but maybe, or if you're really looking forward to it. But if each of you want to talk about it, Greg, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think there's going to be more personalization, right? Like when read this cycle, I could probably talk for 30 full minutes about the amount of like product updates and like specific things that they rolled out for all of us that are designed to create more personalization, especially pathways. But I think it's personalization. And then on the texting side, we did some of this. We would do more of it if I was returning CLF, especially on like two-way texting, right? Like real time, like if you're going door to door and you're asking for money because you're like selling stuff to pay for your trip to DC and you're in middle school, you're having a conversation with them about like why you want to go on the trip and what you're going to do and all that kind of stuff. So like people want to converse. They get so much texting that seems like it's supposed to be real, right? Your first name is included. Hi, this is such and such. And ultimately, right, it's just like some like SMS or like P2P like click thing. And with a link and no follow-up. I think you're going to see more two-way texting, right? Asking people something with no link, right? Oh, did you see this on Fox News that such and such said X? When people respond yes, then following up with the ask. I think there's going to be more of that because like the one-way stuff is just so inundated and it's getting, it's getting killed off, and people are, a lot of this stuff was new, right? And when it's new to donors, you see them respond because they think it's cool and they're like, oh, this is like a different thing. But then like it wears out, right? Like matching, when it was new, oh my gosh, matching was like the greatest thing of all time and people all responded to it. And now if you ask an online donor about matching, they're like, yeah, no, we get it. It's fake. Like this stuff is like ridiculous. So like there's going to have to be some new. And I think like the two-way stuff, taking the next step of like actually making all this real is probably the next place I would go.
Cool. Laura?
Yeah, definitely. I'll start with the political map. The DGA was really excited and proud to be the only Dem committee that didn't lose a seat last year, and I think we won resoundingly in North Carolina up and down the ballot in a really, really hard political environment for Democrats. Our map is completely lopsided to the presidential map, so we have 38 races this year and next. So we're excited to be, I think, the name of the game for governors and politics. On the tactics side, I think a few things. I think that folks used to talk a lot about like micro targeting and advertising and acquisition and reaching voters and have moved away from that. I think you're going to continue, I agree, to see more of that on the texting side, and why, again, surveys have been a pillar of our texting program because it does allow response. We've also seen a lot of success in micro-targeting who we're actually sending a text to. For example, someone who's an active donor but has unsubscribed from our email list, incredible response rates by reaching out to them on text instead, if they prefer that channel. So I think that's something you're going to continue to see more of for sure. And I will just lastly add that the DGA, unlike perhaps some other folks, has a real match program that we substantiate. So we found that to continue to be effective. And yeah, we have the budget receipts. We don't do an 800% match, but we do a real one. So
yeah, so plus one to all of that. Instead of tactics, I'm going to focus a little bit on tech and infrastructure in terms of what comes next. This is more of a wish list maybe than a prediction, but I would love to see more integrated tech stacks. I would love if we were right now, digital fundraising is a exercise in being an expert in many, many different softwares. And a lot of those softwares do very similar things, but just for different channels. And if we were able to consolidate some of those softwares under one roof, it would not necessarily unlock greater fundraising potential, but it would create more efficiency, which would allow us to free up more time for our staff to focus on other relevant and salient things. And it's hard to know until the tech stacks actually have been integrated, but I would imagine that the data will lead you to some learnings that you didn't necessarily have before, show some crossover similarities between your two channels that you hadn't recognized on your own. The one other thing that I will mention is AI, and it's kind of funny because like people talk about AI a lot, and I'm personally a bit of a skeptic of how much of an impact it can have on our particular little like niche industry. The caveat to that is targeting. Anyone who has done a lot of work in online fundraising is familiar with targeting. It's basically the process that you decide who a certain message goes to, right? And that process for most programs that I am aware of is still largely manual. It's very, very nuanced and advanced, but it's taking place by individuals actually parsing lines of SQL or like playing around in a database until they get the count that they want. And that is one area that I think I would be really interested to see some automated innovations, make it a little bit easier for our practitioners to find the most likely supporters, the most likely active supporters, most likely donors, and show us some of those insights automatically rather than relying on individuals essentially just pressing buttons simply because the software doesn't yet allow them to not press those buttons. So someone out there, make that.
Hey, Jason.
For WinRed, we see teams getting smaller and smaller. I'm not quite sure exactly why that's happening, at least on the right. And so a lot of what we're building is how do we allow these incredibly small teams to do the work that used to be 5 people or 10 people and move quickly and move efficiently? How do they get answers to questions like that? There's an earlier question about what happened when Kamala Harris took over and Joe Biden dropped out. We have a bunch of features on WinRed where you could update all of your pages, and you might have 10,000, 20,000 pages. And so people can do that, or they can make 100 pages at a time because that's how they do their marketing channels. They want separate pages for everything. And so a lot of what we're doing is how do we make our users, our page builders, far, far more efficient? And we have a ton of stuff that we're looking to roll out this cycle so that those teams can stay small, and those dollars, instead of going to people whose jobs don't really need to exist to do this, they can go towards doing better things, more efficient things for the organizations.
Great, thank you. So we have time, I think, for a few questions, Steve.
Hi, my name is Kevin, and I actually work for an email and SMS marketing platform called Campaigner. First of all, you all are poster children for what it means to be a good sender, so thank you. I could have asked this probably to anybody today, but my question for you is, with all of the other districts and all of the campaigns going on, how do you pay attention to and try to manage what could be voter fatigue for messaging? You know, there's so many mediums that they're being hit on. So on these channels in particular, how do you think about that when you're planning your sends and the cadence of sends that you're going to do?
I can start. This might be boring, but I think it comes back to testing again. We are only sending a message to your inbox, whether that be on your phone or your email, if it has passed a test threshold. And that's on a response rate for a survey or donation rate for fundraising optimization. And so I think it goes back to something Cliff mentioned earlier, but it might seem like there's fatigue about a certain type of messaging, but if a large organization or a campaign committee, a governor's campaign is sending that, they have like data to back that up. And we certainly pull a lot of messages where we were trying something unusual, or perhaps we sent the same version of an email too many times. If we're sending something to inboxes, you know, it's getting more and more costly. Isn't something we've talked about today, but both on the email and the texting side, it's very expensive to send that message more and more. And so I think if it's getting to your inbox, it's met a response rate threshold where our target audience is responding at the rate that we want to see.
Yeah, and I think some of it's just like common sense around like, you got to suppress people who just gave, right? If they just gave yesterday, why would you ask them to give again today? Maybe you have a moment that's different and unique, right? They've changed who's at the top of the ticket of the presidential or something that warrants that. But like, treat donors well, right? If they've recently given, don't ask them again. How did they come to your list? Oh, they came through the Stand for Israel mug. They may not care about the border. So maybe I shouldn't send the border message to my entire list, right? Like, some of it is so common sense, but we get into this like numbers game of just like scale and mass and send. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of, frankly, I think what we used to do in this space when digital fundraising was newer, right? We were, I think, maybe a little more meticulous about those kinds of things. And then online fundraising took off and we became maybe more haphazard. But it goes back to the first thing I said today, which is treat donors like voters. They don't exist in like a bubble where they just give money and you can say and do and send however much you want to them without any consequence, right?
Yeah, I guess one thing that's interesting to me is sometimes I don't actually think that common sense is what performs well or raises the most money. Some of it's very common for the writers on my team, like the messages you fall in love with and inevitably do not test well to actually roll out. It's always the one I won't give specific examples, but like, I'm sure you can all think of the examples that we have seen over the years. And when you roll your eyes at them, like, other people do too. But they also perform really well. So one of the things that, we have tried really hard to do is test every assumption, even if it seems like common sense. Well, I've never tested this for sure. So like an example would be, you say it's common sense to not text a person the day after they've given. I'd be curious if that's been tested, right? Like, have you segmented a list of folks who did give yesterday and send them a direct appeal, thanking them for their gift the prior day and asking them if they can take one more action? You already know if they donated yesterday, they're one of the most engaged parts of your list. So it might be the case, that you'd have a lot of drop off or unsubscribes if you hit them again right away. It might not be the case though too, right? So until you've tested it, I try to minimize the stuff that I assume about the list, because I've seen so many times the stuff that I assumed just be proven wrong once you actually test it.
Any other questions?
The only thing I'd say to that is again, the game is winning elections. You want to have enough money. You don't necessarily have the most money. So you can raise money and treat your donors however you want, but you got to win too. So the unintended consequences of, yes, it may be high performing because 10 people out of a list of 100 gave again, but you've upset the other 90 again, right? I think there are consequences to this for actually winning the election that have to be considered as well, right? It's not a contest to raise the most money. If it was, Kamala Harris would be president by a long shot. But we have to do more than raise money. We have to win. And so I think you have to think politically about fundraising as well. You cannot just think of it as the race to raise the most money. I really believe that. And I think it's something that has to be thought of.
I think I saw a question back there, Steve. Although, no, to your right, to your right.
Hopefully a quick question. Joseph from AdForum. You guys talk a lot about personalization. What's your use of first-party data and any best practices you can share?
So some of the features that we have on WinRed is actually we're able to pull data across the entire platform. So when I talked about the data being personalized to Greg or to myself, Greg didn't have to give to, let's say, CLF. And yet if he's logged in, WinRed can pull that data across the whole platform and say, oh, Greg's information across the whole platform is he's a $100 donor. So even though CLF doesn't know that, we're able to change the amounts on his page when he visits. Now, again, we're not giving that data out. It's not like a data leak. They can't just go pull it or whatever. But when that donor comes there, it's personal to them, not just them as like, oh, a CLF donor, but them as like a donor across the entire platform. And so that's one of the ways that we use data across the entire WinRed ecosystem or the entire Republican ecosystem to make everybody better.
Yeah, ActBlue has similar features that over I don't know, maybe like a decade, I don't remember, but they have a feature started called ActBlue Express that allows a donor to opt in and save not just their name, address, but also their payment information if they prefer. And that's one of our most active and responsive donor segments consistently because it eliminates that friction point. We also do a lot of work with speaking to our donors and most active supporters in a custom way in their inboxes. It's a lot easier on email than it is on SMS, but being sure we're accounting for their past survey response, that we know their name and zip code and location and can even speak to folks in their area. So I think it pulls through both on that first point of contact and then, of course, on the ActBlue donate page or the survey page as well. For a fundraising purpose, we think about that on a dual track.
I think that's it, Steve. Yep.
Barbie,
Thanks, guys.
panel, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.